Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to ZoomIN 84, our virtual get together, a platform where we share the joy of being together with each other. The annual national budget was presented in the Parliament yesterday by the Finance Minister, Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman, sharing insight about the major announcements that happened yesterday and updating us about how this budget will affect us. We have with us today Mr. Ashok Jha, former Finance Secretary. We are delighted and honored to have you with us on ZoomIN this evening, Mr. Jha. I would like to quote from an article written by you in the recently published Vasant Vihar Club's newsletter, Community, where you say, for purely historical reasons, budgets in India has aroused great deal of interest, hopes, and expectations. We would like you to tell us more about this fascination that we have and why we are glued to our TV sets when the budget is presented. Also, it's the small things that we have in our lives that give us most happiness. As you have said, housewives take a more holistic approach to the budget. The first question that pops in my mind is, how will the budget affect the household expenditure? Has batti, pani, gas, food items become cheaper? The second thing that comes to my mind when I think about the budget is, are there any provisions in the budget that will make the life of my staff easier? The third, will the roads and the pavements in Vasant Vihar become world class, or at least better? Fourth, as I am a member of the club committee, are there any exemptions that institutions like the clubs, which have been adversely affected by the pandemic, can expect from the budget? Simple, everyday things. Residents, as I mentioned, Mr. Jha is a fellow Vasant Vihar resident. He is a 1969 batch IAS officer and has one of the few civil servants to have worked extensively in foreign policy, industrial promotion, international trade, as well as economic affairs and finance. During his long stint as a civil servant, he has worked both with the state as well as the central government. He was part of the all-important Finance Ministry for 2 years, first as the Secretary, Economic Affairs, and then as Finance Secretary, where he continues as Secretary, Economic Affairs. He was involved in preparing the Union budget for 2 years, the years when the GDP growth in India clocked 9.5%. So this is something we will want to know more about from you in the course of the evening. Mr. Jha was instrumental in formulating macroeconomic policies relating to fiscal and public finance, inflation, public debt management, and the functioning of the capital markets. Before his stint in the Finance Ministry, Mr. Jha was the Secretary, Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, entrusted with channeling foreign direct investments into India. He ushered in a patent regime to conform with international norms. He was also a member of the Atomic Energy Commission and the Space Commission. He was India's alternate governor in the World Bank and at the Asian Development Bank. He was an advisor, international affairs at FICCI, which is the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. On retiring, Mr. Jha was appointed as the executive president of the Hyundai Motor India. An avid golfer, which General Prasad just mentioned, an avid golfer, Mr. Jha graduated from St. Stephen's College in economics and then went to do his master's from Delhi School of Economics. He has another master's degree in development economics from Australian National University and was a visiting fellow at Oxford University in the UK. He is currently an independent director on the board of few companies. So we welcome you again, Mr. Jha, And I would like the President, General Shankar Prasad, to welcome you and say a few words. Over to you, General Prasad.
Thank you so much, Sanjana. Ashok, welcome again, and thanks for accepting our invitation at short notice. Ashok has always been very supportive of all our activities. I recall back in the year 2015, when we had the silver jubilee of our club, he participated in a panel discussion relating to matters concerning finance. And more recently, we asked him about 10 days ago to write an article for our magazine as to what can be expected out of the budget. Of course, the budget hadn't been announced till then. And within a week's time, Ashok produced a beautiful article. Of course, he put a caption below it saying that this has been written before the budget because it was issued yesterday. And I think a large number of you must have seen it, the digital version. The printed version will be out in another day or so. Ashok has been very much involved with budgeting. He's been always supporting every activity that we do in our society, and which is why even at such a short notice, he has agreed to come on this discussion today on the budget presented yesterday by the finance minister. But as Sanjana very rightly brought out, budget interests everybody, right from the poor to the richest. Everybody wants to know, am I going to gain anything? Is my income going to increase? Because everybody makes a budget. Doesn't matter how much that budget total amount may be. He doesn't write it, but mentally he does prepare it. He says, all right, this is my salary. This is what I'm going to earn. This is where I'm going to spend. I have to spend so much on roti, kapra, makan. I've got to spend so much on education. I have to set aside so much for clothing and for entertainment and for children, etc., etc. So he makes a mental budget. And, budget is something that everybody understands. But when you go to the national budget, the union budget, it creates a total different picture. It kind of tells you as to what the government wants to do, where the government is taking the country. And which is why everybody, as Sanjana said, is looking forward to how am I going to benefit. Sanjana goes on to say, how is my club going to benefit? Am I going to get something from my society? So all of these issues are very much interested. And of course, those of us who are in various professional branches also look at our own professional fields. Like perhaps as we get along, Ashok, we will talk about the defense budget as well, particularly specific to defense. So without going to any more details, we look forward to a very interesting presentation or discussion with you. And once you have finished your presentation, we will open the house for our people who are participating to raise any questions or go into any discussion with you. Thank you so much, Ashok, and over to you.
Thank you, Sanjana, and thank you, Shankar. I think you've given me a very generous introduction, which I don't know whether I deserve it or not. At the outset, I would like to say that, Sanjana, you're going to be disappointed because the budget does not do anything for the Aam Aadmi. Aam Aadmi meaning, the ordinary people like you and me. The household budgets are not directly impacted. Walking around the pavements are not going to be affected. The exemptions for institutions like clubs are not going to be in any way altered from whatever they are currently. So this budget is a different sort of budget. Before I sort of get into the presentation, I would like to make it very clear that I am neither a politician nor a supporter of any political party. I believe in saying what I think is right, and and not really beating around the bush if it comes to criticizing something or something which I don't think is correct. And neither am I an expert, because little bit of knowledge that I had was there when I was in service. I retired many years ago, and even that knowledge has faded into the distant past. So with these caveats, let me try and make some sense of whatever the budget that has been presented. I will split the budget into my presentation into three parts. In the first part, I will try to look at the budget from the point of view of what would interest most people who are in the audience today. of course, some of it may not interest some people, but I'm trying to, in fact, I racked my brains to determine what would be of interest to people who are here residing in Vasant Vihar. So first part I'll devote to that. The second will be of more of a general nature, what the budget has covered in the general nature, which maybe people would be interested in knowing. And the third are areas or aspects which I think we could have improved in the budget. Given, of course, this is all given the kind of constraints under which finance ministers typically work, and more so during the current pandemic. The first thing about the budget is that despite elections to 5 states around the corner, this was not an election budget. There were no freebies that were announced by the finance minister, which I think was a stupendously brave effort, because the temptation to go in for freebies is always very great when the elections are around the corner. Let me first start with the income tax issues, because that probably affects most people here. There are no changes either in the rates or slabs, but there have been a few changes in certain aspects of the income tax, which I'll briefly enumerate. The first most important one is that returns can now be updated within 2 years of the end of the financial year for which the return has been filed. So what this implies is that if somebody has filed a return and maybe inadvertently has missed out some source of income and not added to the return, then she can go and update that return within 2 years of the end of the financial year. And of course, there is a penalty attached to it. The maximum would be about 50% of the tax liability, but at least the window is there. The department has probably come up with this because earlier there were a lot of litigations which were quite unnecessary, and this gives a chance to the taxpayer to make good errors, which some of it may have been in good faith. Inadvertent errors, to rectify that. The second thing is that the long-term capital gains surcharge has been capped at 15% on sale of any asset. Earlier, this capping of 15% was there only if it was a listed security. Now it can be unlisted security, it can be even immovable property, and this is going to help a lot of the startups, because startups typically are not listed, and so if they sell anything there, the capital gains would be capped at 15%. The third thing that I want to mention is what has gained a lot of discussion in the recent past. That is about cryptocurrency. What the budget says is that any income from transfer of a virtual digital asset is to be taxed at a flat rate of 30%. No deductions are allowed except the cost of acquisition of that asset. Now, the implication of this is very clear. The implication is that if anybody has cryptocurrencies there are now literally hundreds of cryptocurrencies floating around internationally. Mm-hmm. So if anybody's got any cryptocurrency and makes any money by sale of that cryptocurrency, then he or she will have to pay a 30% flat rate of tax on any income derived from that sale. Of course, some questions are yet to be answered on this. The first question that arises is, will this also attract GST? Now that has not been mentioned by the finance minister, presumably because probably since all matters relating to GST are handled by the GST Council, so probably that is why it has been left out. But that's a question mark which is going to be hanging. And the other issue here is that, does this mean that cryptocurrencies are legalized? Because if you're taxing something, then obviously it has to be legal. That is why you're taxing it. If it was not legal, then it would not be taxed. You would ban the whole thing. So this probably indicates, again, this is my interpretation. This probably indicates that the cryptocurrencies are going to be legalized. As we all know, there was a bill which was put out for in public domain, but that bill has not yet been introduced in the House, and it has not yet been cleared. So we don't know what shape that legislation is going to take, but this clearly indicates the intention of the government to legalize cryptocurrency. The next item is about the when searches and surveys are done by the Income Tax Department, then no loss can be set off against undisclosed income, which is unearthed during the search or the survey. The next item is about concessional tax regime of 15% for newly set up manufacturing units. This is only applicable to manufacturing companies. This was introduced a couple of years ago, that for new manufacturing companies, the concessional tax rate would be 15%, and there was a sunset date prescribed. That sunset date has now been increased to March 2024. Because of the pandemic, extension has been given to that date. And then also the other aspect is the cess and surcharge has been determined to be not a business deduction. What was happening earlier was that some assessees had claimed this they said that it was not a tax, cess and surcharge, and therefore it was a business deduction. And in some areas it had been allowed by the authorities. So this has made it very clear that cess and surcharges are not a part of a business deduction. And then the other aspect here is about doctors who get freebies from pharmaceutical companies. Those freebies cannot be claimed as a deduction. So that means if there are any doctors in this audience, they will probably find that pharma companies will no longer extend them freebies. In terms of, sometimes they were even getting foreign trips as a part of a promotional campaign. So this will no longer be allowed. So pharma companies obviously are not going to give these freebies. Then the last item that I wanted to mention as far as income tax is concerned was on sale of property. As we all know, on sale of property, TDS has to be deducted by the buyer on sale consideration or stamp duty value, whichever is higher. Earlier it was that TDS was being this is 1% TDS. This 1% TDS earlier was being deducted on the sale consideration. Now what the budget says is that it will be now either sale consideration or stamp duty value, whichever is higher. So that is, these are some of the more important income tax issues that have been mentioned in the budget, which I thought I would share with you. There are a few others which may not be of much interest to to all of us. Then Shankar mentioned about the defense expenditure. Now, defense expenditure hike is in this current year's budget is about 4.4% over the revised estimates of the previous year. And if you look at the budget estimates to budget estimates, that is budget estimate of the current year with the budget estimate of the coming year, then the increase is about 9.8%. Now, the issue, is, of course, is that is it adequate? And the second issue concerning this is the provision that has been made that 68% of the capital expenditure, procurement, has to be from local companies, from Indian companies. Now, is that going to in any way detract from the efficiency of the armed forces? Now, of course, the question here is very broad-based in the sense that if you look at it from the overall angle, defense expenditure of India is amongst the lowest for as far as similarly placed countries are concerned. Our defense expenditure, if we add pensions to that is defense pensions to the overall total, then the defense expenditure is about 2%. If we remove pensions, then it is only 1.5% of GDP. In terms of as a percentage of the budget outlay, defense expenditure is around 8% of the total budget outlay. Now, whether the defense expenditure is adequate or not, I think many people have voiced their opinions in the past also. I think especially since we are now faced with very difficult situations on our borders, perhaps the defense expenditure could slowly increase. But then this is something which I guess the government will have to take a call. And there is enough justification for it to be increased slightly. The only point that I would mention here is that when I was in the finance ministry, I found that every year, whatever allocation was being made for defense, there would be a lot of shortfall in expenditure. And at the last minute, we would have to reappropriate the budget from defense to some other department, ministry, or field, wherever it was, wherever there was a demand. So I think both things have to be looked at. We have to look at the defense expenditure as well as the capacity of in the present system of spending that extra amount, whatever is given. Then another aspect of the budget is on green energy. I think this is a step in the right direction because the government has given certain commitments internationally also to increase the quantum of green energy that we utilize. So in this budget, there is a focus on both solar modules and as a part of the PLI, that is the performance-linked incentive scheme, as well as in pushing electric vehicles. The electric vehicles really are going to be the future. I think in the next countries in Europe have already given finite dates by which no ICE vehicles will be allowed. And I think we are also probably going to move in that direction very soon. So for electric vehicles, they have the budget has come up with a battery swapping plan, which would hasten the process of electrification of the vehicles. Now, there is another scheme which I'll mention, which is the piped water supply scheme, which for which the outlay is about 60,000 crores. The reason why I'm mentioning this is that it's the lack of proper water that has caused a lot of health issues in our rural areas. And this is a scheme which was introduced again a couple of years ago. And this year they expect that with the budgeted outlay, some 38 million households in the rural areas will get piped water supply. Now, overall, if we look at it, the overall budget expenditure is 39.4 lakh crores. I mean, if we look at it from the point of view of increase from the previous year, that is the current financial year, the increase is around 4.6%. So it's not a very large increase. In fact, if we consider that inflation is running close to 6%, it does not even cover the inflationary situation. The other aspect here is that the economic survey, which came out a day before the budget was presented, that economic survey talked about 8 to 8.5% growth in GDP. Now, which to my mind is extremely optimistic. It is extremely optimistic because the first half of the current financial year, our growth was around 13.5% or so. And we are saying, the economic survey also says that the growth for the full year is going to be 9.2%, which implies that in the latter half of this current financial year, the growth will only be about 5%. So if the growth is going to be 5% ending March this year, then from that to jump to 8 or 8.5% seems to be a rather big leap. So that is one issue. The other issue on this GDP figures is that in the budget document, they have assumed a GDP growth of 11.1%, nominal GDP growth. Now, which implies that the inflation would only be 3%, because if nominal GDP growth is 11% and we are looking at actual real GDP growth of 8 or 8.5%, that means inflation is only 3%, which again is not, cannot be correct, because inflation currently is close to 6%. So I think there has to be some rethinking on those figures. Very briefly, I think I'll mention about the indirect taxes. Basically, indirect taxes, of course, come under the ambit of the GST Council, but custom duties have been increased and decreased in this in the budget. There's been increase in custom duties of imitation jewelry, headphones, earpods, umbrellas. I don't know why umbrellas. I must find out what is the reason for umbrellas. So in these areas, the custom duties have been increased, and of course, for amongst the products for which custom duties has been reduced is cut and polished diamonds. So I think government wants people to spend more money on diamonds and less on umbrellas.
I guess housewives should be happy about that. Sorry to interrupt here.
Then, of course, there have been some other increases and decreases of custom duties. But in fact, even for some capital goods import exemptions which were there earlier, for various sectors like power, etc., capital goods required for the power sector, there was exemption in customs duties, but the budget papers say that they are going to slowly phase them out. The whole idea is Atmanirbhar, that all these capital goods should therefore be produced in India. So that is as far as the issues which I thought may have been of interest to all of us. Then I look at some of the general issues which have been covered in the budget. Some of them impact on the macroeconomic stability. The first is, of course, the fiscal deficit, which is a very important number because fiscal deficit really shows the extent to which we are living beyond our means. So the fiscal deficit, this in the FY 22-23, is being brought down from 6.9% the current year to 6.4%. Now, fiscal deficit by itself, there's nothing wrong with it, in the sense that you can live beyond your means. Even households can live beyond their means, provided the extra expenditure is something which is which produces income. So, if the fiscal deficit is there and most of it is used to finance investment, then there's no problem with it. The problem only arises if the fiscal deficit is there, high fiscal deficit, and it is used to finance current revenue expenditure. In other words, if you are borrowing money and we are blowing it up on wining and dining, then that's not quite the correct way of going about it. So this in this budget, 45% of the fiscal deficit is slated to be for financing capital expenditure. So which is a pretty happy situation. The second aspect, which is of a general nature, is that the government is going in for investment in affordable housing. Something like 48,000 crores have been allotted for affordable housing, both for the urban areas as well as for the rural areas. So this will give an impetus to various industries, steel, cement, and also push the employment, those who are in the construction sector. For MSMEs, that is your micro, small, and medium enterprises, they took a heavy beating during this pandemic of the last couple of years. And for them, there was this emergency credit line guarantee scheme. And there was a credit guarantee trust for micro and small enterprises. So both these schemes have been further extended so that they can further benefit the MSMEs, since the pandemic does not show any signs of completely getting, removing itself from the scene. This scheme is very useful for these small enterprises because there is a moratorium also of 2 years, during which they don't have to pay any interest or any repayment. Another useful scheme that the budget has mentioned is about the sovereign green bonds. These green bonds, these will be, as the name implies, these are sovereign green bonds, so they will be issued by the government. And they will be deployed in public sector green projects. This again is a very, is again something which will be of great use, especially because of this climate change activity. Then linked with this cryptocurrency, RBI is going to issue digital currency sometime during the financial year 23. This also makes it very clear that the government is intending not to ban cryptocurrency, but to regulate it, regularize it in some way. And one of those things would be that the RBI is going to issue this digital currency. Now, one of the most, I think, important features of this budget has been the massive increase that is sought in the capital expenditure. The increase in the capital expenditure proposed is as high as 35% if one looks from the budget estimates of the previous year to the budget estimates of the FY23. And apart from the massive capital expenditure, the government is also going to assist state governments to incur capital expenditure by increasing their grants in aid specifically for this purpose, and that increases up to 1 lakh crores. As a result of this increase, we will have a much higher expenditure on infrastructure sectors, railways, roads, ports, airports, and so on, which in the long run will be very beneficial for the economy. And it is going to create a lot of jobs. Many jobs are lost during this pandemic. So this is going to create a lot of jobs, and it will have its own multiplier effects on various industries, as I mentioned, steel, cement, and so on. So this is one of the, I would say, the pivotal aspects of the budget that has been introduced. I think I've already spoken.
Yeah.
I'll just take just 5 minutes more. I'll
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Because basically I wanted to share my thoughts about the budget.
Absolutely, yes.
So, I mean, so far I was telling you what the finance minister has put in the budget. Now, overall, my opinion is that it's a good budget. It's, given the tough conditions under which this budget was presented and the tough financial situation that the country is facing and the pandemic that we are still undergoing, I think it's a good budget. But there are a few issues which I think I would like to highlight. One is that, every single budget, at least the last few years, one sees that there is a huge, right after the first preliminary 1 or 2 paragraphs, there is a focus on agriculture. And agriculture basically takes pride of place in the finance minister's budget speeches. And rightly so, because that's the sector where bulk of our people live in the rural areas, and they depend on agriculture or allied activities for their incomes. So given that, I'm a little disappointed in the sense that what has happened in this budget is that we have reduced certain subsidies, food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy, this Kisan Samman Nidhi, which is also a subsidy. Now, reducing subsidies is fine, but it is still very high. For instance, this food subsidy is, I think in the current year, the allocation is going to be of 2.86 lakh crores. No, sorry, it's going to be 2.07 lakh crores. Now, this is all for the public distribution system. Now, there is no problem with the PDS, but if the point really is that the coverage of the PDS is humongous. Something like 2/3 of the population of the country is being covered under PDS. Obviously, 2/3 of the population are not so poor that they need PDS. So some money could have been saved out of that. Similarly, fertilizer subsidies, some money could have been saved out of that. And more money should, in my view, should have been put for investment in agriculture. Because what the main issue in agriculture today is that, we are giving subsidies, it doesn't really increase productivity. So we need to put investment in agriculture, which is going to increase productivity. Then the second issue is about the Manrega, that is basically the employment generation scheme. Now we have a Manrega which in the current year, the demand for it was so huge because of unemployment that I think the outlay ultimately was over 1 lakh crores. In the coming year's budget, it is now come back to 73,000 crores or so, which is okay. But my point has always been that a lot of people in the urban areas, urban poor, suffered due to the pandemic. They lost their jobs. Some of them haven't even got their jobs back. In fact, if one looks at the employment figures, for the first time, employment in agriculture has increased, which implies that people who went back from the urban areas, they couldn't come back after the second wave, and they had to hang on there in the rural areas, and so they are shown to be working in agriculture. So given that, in my view, we should go in for some kind of an urban employment generation scheme. The third aspect that I want to highlight is as I had mentioned earlier, that custom duties have been increasing, and even in this budget there has been increases on various on various goods.
Yeah.
Now, this increase in customs duties to protect local industries is, in my view, not a very good idea. We tried this right from 1947 till 1991. That was what we did under the erroneous impression that our industries were infant and they needed to be protected. And it didn't lead to any kind of efficiency or quality of products produced in the country. So, and we seem to be regressing into that. So I think there is some rethinking needs to be done on that score.
Okay.
Another aspect is about inflation. The budget did not mention inflation at all, whereas inflation, as we know, the consumer price index inflation is close to 6% right now, and the WPI, that is wholesale price index, that inflation is in double digits. And usually what happens is that the CPI inflation seeps into the WPI inflation. So then, it's sort of after a while, the CPI inflation will also rise if WPI inflation is high. So again, we need to be careful on that.
Yeah.
Then another aspect is about employment generation. See, one of the biggest problems that the pandemic left us with is very high levels of unemployment. Now, although this massive increase in capital expenditure in infrastructure is going to help in getting many unemployed people back, you get them jobs again. But this is indirect in the sense that it takes a while to spend the money, for people to be employed, etc. Probably some kind of a direct income stimulus to those who have lost their jobs may have been helpful in basically kickstarting the economy. I think we probably have missed out on that, and particularly so since the labor participation rates in the country have really plummeted in the last year or so. In fact, our women labor participation rate is even lower than that of Vietnam and Bangladesh. So this, I think we could have looked at that.
Yeah. Can we give some chance to the people also to speak, because you want to leave in time?
Okay. Fair enough. I had a few more points, but
you go ahead quickly. Let's finish the points that you've got.
Okay. I think I've taken more time than I thought I would.
Never mind. It doesn't matter. If Raj and Sanjana can increase the time for our show.
There is no
problem, sir. No problem.
So it's quite interesting, and a lot of people may want to.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I'll quickly run through the points.
Sure.
I think I'm talking too much.
No, that's not the point. But you're bringing a lot of issues to the table.
Okay. Another aspect that I thought we could have looked at, the budget could have looked at, is the debt to GDP ratio. See, it is now climbed up, according to various estimates, to about 90%. And that is why, if you look at this year's budget that has been presented, 20% of the budgeted expenditure will go towards interest payments. So we need to basically look at that, how to reduce that. Another aspect is resource mobilization. Now, the finance minister has not introduced any new taxes to mobilize resources, which is well and good, because in these difficult times to introduce new taxes would have been very cruel. But there are other ways of raising resources without raising taxes. The non-tax revenues. Now, two of the most prominent ones are disinvestment and asset monetization. Now, for disinvestment, in fact, the figures for the next year's budget, it has come down to around 65,000 crores from current year's budget of 1.75 lakh crores. So we are obviously not looking at disinvestment in that frame of mind as we were earlier. And then land monetization is something which needs to be looked at, because it's a lot of land that is lying with various agencies in the government and which could be monetized and revenues raised from it. Then I think I still have 3-4 issues, but I'm taking up so much time, so I will just stop here and maybe we'll cover it in the discussion.
Maybe some questions.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ashok. You made a very detailed presentation, and I think people have enjoyed it more than what we were enjoying on the TV the last 2 days. But I must come back to national security. And the issue of national security is pretty much paramount, not only in the minds of defense people, but perhaps every citizen of the country. We have very active northern borders. We are very much aware of it. We have very active western borders. We have insurgency still going on in the northeast and in the Kashmir Valley. With this kind of security scenario, we have 27,000 policemen deployed for conducting a Republic Day parade. That's the kind of threat that we are looking at. We are looking at threat not only from the conventional method, but also things like drones, which are going to be very difficult to contend with. Now, under those circumstances, you have a GDP allocation of less than 2% to defense, I think is neglecting it deliberately, or whichever way you want to put it. Just to put it in perspective to you, Ashok, and my other colleagues on the panel, on the discussion, our defense budget today is at $70 billion, the current budget that has been announced. The Chinese this year have got $209 billion. Can you believe it? In 2014, the Chinese had $131 billion. It raised in 14 to $146 billion. And this year now it is $209 billion. Now this is an increase every year by 6 to 7%. And we have gone down from something like 3% some years ago to 1.5% if we include pensions, and without pensions, just below 2%. I think this needs another look, and perhaps, what the government says and what the finance ministry says, oh, if you need money, we will give it to you at the time that you require it, at the time of RE stage. But the question is, it is anybody can see it today, Ashok, that the revenue expenditure is going to go colossal this time, with the kind of troops induction into Ladakh and other places in difficult areas. More equipment is being flogged. The defense revenue is going to go up substantially. You will not be able to control it. And the second more important thing, which I would like you to think about, may not be able to get an answer today from our people on the budget. You see, defense equipment doesn't come in one financial year. If you're going to buy a Rafale aircraft, it's going to take 3 years to come. And the payments are made periodically. Now, when you said in your presentation just now that many a times the capital budget remains unspent, and then you transfer it to other ministries and reappropriation. The way to really handle defense budget to some of our defense officers is that you allocate a sum of money and then you carry it forward. Now you have to allocate money by items, because these are very huge cost items. You buy an aircraft carrier, you buy a submarine, you buy an aircraft, They're huge sums of money, and payments are made over 1, 2, or 3 years. So you allocate X amount of money for Rafale, and that is it. Now, whether you spend it this year, the next year, the third year, is for the finance ministry and the defense ministry to see how the equipment is coming in, how the equipment is being paid for. Now, to say 68% of indigenous production, wonderful idea. We all subscribe to it. But under the current security scenario, you will not be able to handle it because the defense equipment being produced in India will take a long time to fructify on the ground. And you will remain without that equipment. And we will have to get that equipment urgently. So it is unrealistic, if I may put it so, to put it at this, because if the chips get down, as it happened in the Kargil war, you will go and buying all over, and you will actually spend more than what you would have budgeted in the normal fashion. So these are a few issues about defense budgeting. And you will recall in in the Kargil war, the way we went out buying at the last minute, by the time the equipment came, the war was over. So this is something that I really thought I would like to talk about. You see, as far as unemployment you spoke about, now the only way, I don't think government can give any more jobs to anybody, neither the railways, nor the defense, nor the regular government jobs, but everybody wants a government job. Government can't give jobs. Who is going to give job? Is jobs going to be created if you develop infrastructure, for example? And there is a huge capital outlay on the infrastructure. So this will generate, but it will take time. Obviously, it's not going to help you in fighting elections right now in the few states that are going to election now. But long run, this is what's going to happen. And my last point before I hand over to other colleagues of mine, that if you spoke about the total expenditure of 39.45 lakh crores and an estimate revenue is 27.58 lakh crores, there seems to be a deficit of about 12 lakh crores. Now, this deficit is going to be much higher than 6% and 6.9% that it was in the previous few years. So this deficit is only going to increase now. And where is this revenue going to be generated from? Well, you spoke about monetization of assets. Yes, there is a proposal to, if not outright sale, maybe on lease, you can give certain railway lands and certain defense lands. That is possible. But again, defense will have to be seen very carefully because it has two implications. One is about the security of certain installations, and second is about the field firing ranges that we need so seriously. So these are just one or two points in relation to what we just spoke. And Sanjana, we can now open for a few minutes to other people on the show if they want to ask any more questions. Thank you. Thank you, Ashok.
Thanks.
Thank you for that, Chandra Prasad. Sir, I had a observation, having read your article earlier. In that you mentioned that the recovery in 2021 has prompted unequal growth where the rich are becoming richer and the poor are becoming poor. Does this budget actually, in some ways address this problem? What do you think?
No, actually it doesn't. It doesn't address that problem at all. And I think the reason why it is not addressing that problem is that, as the finance minister mentioned in her speech, that she was, the advice from the prime minister to her was that no new taxes in this budget. See, there has been a lot of talk about some fresh taxes, not necessarily income tax, but fresh taxes like, say, reintroduction of a wealth tax, and this time calibrating it in a more careful manner, such that only the very, very rich, not the middle class, who will fall within the ambit of the wealth tax. But obviously, I mean, the finance minister felt that introducing any new tax at this time would not go down very well with the people. After all, we are in a democracy. So therefore, it was not introduced. But I think there is an argument for that, because if you see all the figures that have come about in the recent past, they show very clearly that the wealth of the really wealthy has gone up appreciably, and whereas many more people have gone below the poverty line in India in the last 2 years. So the gap is really widening, and that gap needs to be bridged.
Yeah, Ashok, there is a question from Reva Dayal. And she says, do you think more should have been allocated to health and education, especially in the rural areas?
Yes, I agree entirely. Entirely. In fact, see, the health I mean, that was one of my points below, because which I didn't mention, the health outlay is just a 12% increase from budget estimate of previous year to the uh, budget estimate of the budgeted year. So 12% increase, when if you take inflation to be 6%, it's only a 6% increase in real terms at a time when when one really needs to spend more money on health. So this is definitely much less. In fact, the health budget, there is a very small outlay for vaccinations, and we all know that vaccination globally, people are looking at booster doses, and maybe a second booster dose, who knows. So health budget definitely is underfunded, and so is education, because education last 2 years, especially in the rural areas and the poorer sections of our society, they have really lost the last 2 years. The school children have lost these last 2 years because they couldn't go online to learn as as the others could. So definitely both these sectors have been underfunded.
There is Suvira Das who has a question, Ashok. She says, what are your views on widening the tax base by taxing rich farmers who own over 10 acres?
So my view has consistently been that they need to be taxed. But when I was in the finance ministry, I was also consistently being overruled. The argument was that, in fact, one of the finance ministers mentioned to me that they are in government, not in charity. And therefore, taxing farmers was a sure shot recipe for disaster as far as they were concerned politically.
And then soon thereafter, Suvira's question is another one. Taxing agricultural income is political hot potato.
Yeah, it is.
You think it will never come?
Yes, it will never come. Although actually one can easily devise a system by which people argument normally against it is that, oh, it will cause a lot of problems to people, poorer farmers, and so on. I think that's a smoke screen. Can be devised by farmers who can afford to pay some tax.
There's another comment from Ajit Sriram, and it's interesting. When we talk of doubling farmers' income, why are we encouraging natural organic farming? We can see what has happened in Sri Lanka, Sikkim. We need better output from the fields, which can start with better quality seeds and inputs. Besides MNCs, we have Indian firms that are doing better R&D, such as GM crops, like we saw in bit cotton many years ago. Your views on this, please.
Yeah. Actually, I agree, because that is why I said that in agriculture, a bulk of our outlays are going towards subsidies. They should actually be going towards investment, so that the productivity of the sector improves. Otherwise, we're just handing out doles. It's it's the same situation. Whether do you teach somebody how to fish, or do you give somebody fish? So we should actually be looking at teaching somebody how to fish.
Well, there is Amrinder Singh who's got his hand up. Amrinder, you have something to say? Unmute yourself, please. Amrinder seems to be from your college also.
I think, Ashok, you are a year senior to me in college.
Okay.
I was commonly known as Amy Singh.
Okay. Yes. Now I remember.
And I think I played golf with you too. Anyway, my question to you, Ashok, is how does this budget transform itself into something for the common man in the short run? And obviously, it's going to do something great in the long run. Please elaborate.
See, again, it's a question of how do we define the common man. If definition of a common man is the the poor agricultural labor or the poor urban labor, then this budget is going to improve their lot marginally, at least in terms of if they were thrown out of a job, if the economy picks up because of the the tremendous capital expenditure that is going to be incurred, then they will get jobs. If they get jobs, their lot improves. But if you're looking at a common man,
Somebody's got his.
Driver.
if a common man, you're looking at people like you and me, then this budget I don't think has much of an impact on our on our situation.
Sanjana, anything more to add?
There are a couple more questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
This was from General Murgai. Could you throw some light on cryptocurrency and how is it going to be beneficial?
He already covered crypto, which is why I didn't come back to Murgai, because he's already covered crypto. Would you like to say anything more to crypto in relation to what General Murgai has put down there?
Well, crypto, as I mentioned, you see, there was a lot of debate about crypto. The debate was basically whether we should regulate it or whether we should ban it. Now, the budget makes it very clear that banning is not going to be an option, that the government intends to regulate it and also derive some revenue from it. So the crypto, actually they're all loosely called cryptocurrencies. They're not all currencies, but the intention of the government obviously is that we will allow it, regulate it, and the cryptocurrency that will be legal will be issued by the RBI.
In what way?
But the question, Ashok, question here is the cryptocurrency is not going to be activated through any bank, and it is. I may have $1 billion cryptocurrency with me, but it's no use to me in Delhi. The only one outlet which I heard recently was that with crypto you can buy Tesla cars. I don't know whether it is correct or not. That's the only company which is trading in crypto. So if I have X amount of crypto, I can pay cryptos to Tesla and buy a car. Now, at that point in time, the government may realize that I bought a car and therefore they'll know that I had crypto and I spent it, and so they can tax me.
Yeah.
But if I do not use crypto here in India, how will the government know that I made profit or loss on it?
Well, if you're holding the asset not in the country but abroad, then obviously the government is not going to know.
No,
But-
even if it's in India, how do you crypto is not coming out in your balance sheet?
No, true. That's true. But if you acquired anything through crypto, you see, it is just like black money, no? In the sense that even today, you can have black money, the government will not be aware of it unless there is a search or whatever and they discover it. So it will be like that. The basic idea will be that it will be outlawed. If it is outlawed, then if you have it, then you have a problem. If the transaction is outlawed, then you have a problem.
If it is going to be legalized, then is it going to be permitted to be traded in the stock exchange? That is question one. And second, in what way it is going to be beneficial to common people like me?
Well, it can never be beneficial to common people like you and me, because this is only those who can take huge risks will go into invest in cryptocurrency. Even today, only those who are very rich are going in for cryptocurrency. But see, the point basically here is that if the government says, as I said, at the moment, government's thinking on this is not yet crystallized from what I can make out. But if the thinking is that, okay, if anybody has got cryptocurrencies, which, and if they derive any income from it, then they have to pay a tax of 30%. If people want to trade in crypto, then you'll have to trade in cryptocurrency, digital currency, which will be issued by RBI. So that is the only legal cryptocurrency, I think, which will be amenable to all the laws of the country. That, I think, is the situation. But in terms of, as I said, there is still a lot of gray area about cryptocurrencies. But slowly, because there was a bill also which had been circulated for comments. So government is still trying to come to terms with what should be the actual treatment of cryptocurrencies.
Thank you very much for clarifying that, sir. Two very quick questions. First, to do with the green energy. There is an emphasis on green energy, yet at the same time, there is custom duty on, components. How does that tally out?
On components of, you mean for solar panels, etc.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So that is why now they are going in. They are going in for, see, custom duties are there for on solar panels because we were not making adequate quantities of solar panels. Most of them we are importing from China. In the present budget, the government intends to give a great boost to this by under the PLI scheme. And I think they have earmarked a large amount of money. I've forgotten how much it is. A large quantum of funds they have earmarked for manufacturing of solar panels locally. So then you will, people, the idea is to protect the industry here and to give as much impetus to solar panel manufacturing here. And in order to do that, they want to increase the customs duties on solar panels imported so that it gives a sheltered market for the guys who are manufacturing solar panels here.
But will the technology which we have indigenously and which is available overseas, will there ever be will it be comparable?
I don't see why it should not be, because, I don't see it, because in everything else, wherever we have gone into it, I think our people have been able to produce, take technology from anywhere and produce it here.
Right.
So how much time do you have, Ashok? I hope you're not in a great hurry.
I think another maybe 5 minutes. I have to go for it.
Sanjana, go on for another 5 minutes. Now that we've got
Another
it with
very
us.
unrelated question to the last question, but you mentioned sale of property. That is something which most of our members here are very concerned and interested in. You mentioned that something about the TDS. There's some changes. That could you elaborate again and just tell us once more about what this was?
No, this basically, the genesis of this is in that you have circle rates and you have market rates. I think that is the background of this whole thing, in the sense that, see, you have a circle rate X and you have a market rate Y. And sometimes the circle rates are higher than the market rate, sometimes it's the other way around. So this TDS that one is that the buyer is supposed to deduct 1%. So it's basically on what value do you deduct? Do you deduct that on the basis of the stamp value of the property, or do you deduct it on the basis of the purchase price? So what this amendment now says is that whichever is higher, you will deduct TDS at the higher rate. That's all that it says.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. There's one comment here from Digvijay Singh. US and more recently China have seen entrepreneurs build global unicorns. Do we see this budget and overall policy increasingly encourage digital entrepreneurship to build companies that become global unicorns?
Well, that's that's rather tough one for me to answer, but I think that
we can have a whole session on this.
Yeah, but I think it's the general direction seems to be for the government to promote the growth of unicorns, because we have, after all, in the last couple of years, India has produced a very large number of unicorns.
As Sanjana says, Ashok, has been a delightful session today. We overshot by about 15 minutes, but you are such a crowd puller that we have got a large number of people attending today. So I think we're going to come back to you to talk financial matters, not necessarily related to budget, but to help us understand how to manage our own budgeting, and particularly the budgeting of the society and the club, which has really had a serious problem in the last 2 years, where the expenditure has far exceeded the money that we could generate. And we're always looking at ways and means to generate extra money. Like you say, you can monetize land. Can I monetize anything in Vasant Vihar? Such are the issues that we want to talk about. And Well, thank you so much for taking time for us, and be ready to come back to us in less than 24 hours of the budget's announcement. And we always look forward to your participation in our activities. I think all the residents of Vasant Vihar who were on the program today wish to thank you for taking time and working so hard to put things into perspective for us. Once again, we are very grateful to you, and thank you so much. And thank you so much, Sanjana and Raj, for putting it all together.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank you
giving me
very
the chance.
much.
Yeah.
And since it's Basant Panchami on 5th of February, a very warm Basant Panchami
I
wish
can
to
see
all
you and
our-
one more gentleman in yellow. I can see you and one more gentleman in yellow.
No, because Basant and Vasant Vihar, there is that connection. So wishing everybody a very happy Saraswati Puja.
Thank you so
With
much.
that, we
Thanks.
bid everybody good night. Thank you, Mr. Jha, for a very enlightening session. I think we had people glued and listening to what you had to say. So we would love to have you back again, if that's possible. And we do hope that the pavements in Vasant Vihar get attended to as well. Somehow, if we can, get a part of what's been budgeted for infrastructure and see if we can improve the lot here. And as a housewife, I would like the prices to go down, but it doesn't seem to be happening. But thank you for being part of us. I mean, part of the session this evening, and thank you, audience, for being part of this evening. Stay well, and we will see you next week, where we discuss Vasant Vihar and Shanti Niketan Diary. So we look forward to your participation in that next week. Till then, good night. Bye bye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.